So Tiffany, welcome to the Reluctant Leader podcast.
Hi, it's great to be here.
I've been looking forward to this for some time. We've had a few hiccups along the way where we haven't been able to get it together with different things getting in our way. Obviously, some major things going on at the moment. But before we get stuck into the topic, I always ask my guests why they do what they do and what was the pivotal moment that took you down that path.
That's a great question. Like, there's so many different ways I can answer that, but I run a film studio in San Francisco that convenes these global days of film and conversation. And I think if you went back in my path, I'm very interested in neuroscience and science and psychology, and how do you convey those ideas in a really compelling way in films. So I've made a lot of films on those subjects, on character and creativity and screen use, all sorts of those kinds of topics. And then I just wrote my first book called 24/6, The Power of Unplugging One Day a Week. And it's about my family's practice of turning off all screens one day a week. So I think if you were to look at a thread in my work, because I make movies, I give talks, wrote a book, and the events I do, they're all about, on some level, what does it mean to be human? How to live a life that matters? And when does technology amplify who we are? And when does it amputate who we are? And how to distinguish the difference between the two. Right. I think if you were to see a thread.
Okay. Now, I was alerted to your work on a course I was doing, actually, where the first thing I watched was The Science of Character. It's an 8-minute film, and I now share it with as many people as I can, because I think there's so much in it. And where did that actual film come from? What was the inspiration?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, and thank you. I mean, that to me is such a fun thing to do. Take a very complicated subject like, really that's about positive psychology, and how radical it was for people to, instead of look at what's wrong with you, to look at what's right with you. And this is based on Marty Seligman and Peterson's work in positive psychology and growth mindset, and really take this huge topic and make it visual, accessible, and for all age groups. Because, it's great to hear that you send it to everyone, and people use it in college, elementary school, leadership training. So it really, that's my favorite kind of creative challenge, is to make a film like that. So the way I first made that is my mom's actually a psychologist. So I grew up really learning a lot about psychology from her. And my father was a surgeon who operated a lot about the brain and wrote about the brain. So I really grew up thinking and learning a lot from them about the brain. But when I learned about the positive psychology research and work about 24 character strengths and how you build them, and I thought that was such an exciting framework to share far and wide. Usually if I hear an exciting idea, my immediate impulse is like, how do I make this really accessible? And then how do I share it as far as possible for as many people as possible to engage with it? So we made that film, and then we ended up doing Character Day, which is a global day of film and conversation about character. I also made a film called Brain Power, which is about early childhood brain development. And then one that I'm just about to re-release called The Adaptable Mind. And it looks at what are the skills we need to flourish in the 21st century. And that film, which is also a 10-minute film, not long. I like them to be short, so you have enough time to have a good discussion. But we have a lot of discussion materials around it. But that one actually has to do with the Ebola epidemic. So it feels very pertinent. Have you seen that one?
Yes, I have, and just recently I mentioned that film because it talks about Mary Beth's story, which would be good for you to actually probably just to outline what that was about.
Yeah, well, there was an artist who during the Ebola epidemic was really asking how frightening it must be for people to see people in hazmat suits when they're dying or when they're really ill. And they don't see the faces of their caregivers who are caring so much for them and trying to get them better. So she had this great idea about putting photographs on the front of healthcare workers' gowns. And it's this very powerful, beautiful story. And she ended up having it happen. So I really wanted to re-release that because, again, we're seeing people in hazmat suits. We're hearing of people dying by themselves. And just that humanity, to bring the humanity back, even while we're trying to keep everyone safe while wearing protective gear.
Yeah, and obviously this is a podcast about leadership, and Mary Beth showed some leadership and that she saw something that needed some attention. She had some burning desire to do something about something, and she got it done, didn't she?
Yeah. Yeah. And that is real leadership, especially right now. I'm finding
Hmm.
that we're lacking some strong leadership here, and a lot of people are rising up to fill that gap. And there's so many beautiful moments I've seen during the pandemic of really everyday people stepping up to be leaders, and then more of our governors stepping up to be leaders, and what it looks like when you are clear and you share your vulnerability, your concern, but you give a clear leadership path, and being flexible to the changing information and acknowledging when you've made a mistake about something, and then
Mm.
strongly leading forward. So I love that the web can let so many people now, and um, it's a really interesting time. I mean, I'm finding, and of course I'm concerned and worried. My brother's a doctor, my sister-in-law's a doctor, a lot of doctors in my family, and really worried about for them and just what they're having to deal with. But
Hmm.
there's so many beautiful moments. Like, I'll just give you an example. I live in a town across the Golden Gate Bridge in the Bay Area,
Hmm.
very far away from where you are, but everyone's been isolating for actually, I think, a lot longer than in England. I mean, we've been home now. This must be our fourth week. And one of the neighbors said, let's all, we live kind of in a rural area, let's howl like coyotes at 8 p.m. in honor of all the healthcare workers. And it was such a simple gesture, but every night we go in our backyard and the whole town is howling. And it's such a sense of community. And it took just
Mm.
someone to have an idea and then put it forward and make it happen. And
Yeah.
I just love that. I'm loving all these moments of humanity that are and leadership that are shining through. And um, of course, that's
Yeah.
more, I
Well,
mean,
we,
there's
I was
lots
going to
of
say,
bigger examples, but
I was going to say we do something a bit more reserved here, and that's we go outside and we clap on our front doorstep in recognition, a bit like
oh,
the Italians and the Spanish have been doing, just to
yeah,
recognise the role that the health service is playing at the moment, and our recognition for that.
yeah, I
So
love it.
yeah, so it is good, and we won't skip too far onto what happens after all this because it's too fresh and too going on. But I think ultimately we're going to learn some big lessons in this period,
Oh,
and
yeah,
hopefully, some good will come out of it, and we'll change and adapt to what we've learned, and hopefully
I
there'll be
hope
some
so.
good. Yeah.
I think so. I mean, I've been reading a lot about the Spanish flu epidemic, and I actually think this is going to go along. It's going to last a lot longer than people think. I mean, I think I was just reading how in China the cases are coming back. So this idea of lockdown, I think, is going to be lasting a lot longer. And I think behavioral change, because that's what a lot of character and leadership is about, right? Behavioral
Hmm.
change. What makes someone change their behavior? And what makes a society change their behavior? And I think there's a great rebalancing happening, because I know the reason I started unplugging from screens one day a week is I had a very dramatic moment in my life where my father died to brain cancer, and my husband's and my daughter was born. It all happened within days, and it was very dramatic, and it made me change my behavior and think, I don't like the way I'm living. I feel I'm distracted all the time on screens. We're going to start turning off screens every week. And we have for over 10 years. And this was the best thing I've ever done, which is why I eventually wrote a book about it. And I feel like we're in another one of those moments where the world is like grabbing everyone by the shoulders and saying, look at the way we're living. We're flying around. We're never really present. We're staring at screens all the time. We're not really paying attention to where we are. And pay attention to where you are. And how do you like the way we're living? Do we like the way we're treating the planet? I mean, the fact that we're ordering like a pencil on Amazon, is that a good use of resources? And I feel like it's a wake up call. And I really hope we learn some big lessons here.
Mm.
It would be a shame if we didn't.
Yeah, well, that again, that will boil down to leadership, people taking
Yeah,
that lead, and seeing something that they want to preserve, want to retain, and doing something about it.
that's
And
right.
I think my gut instinct is that those things will happen. But who knows how long this is going to go on for? This is back end of March to 2020 at the moment. So for people that listen to this in the future, this is what the period we're talking about. Very sort of first month or so of the coronavirus epidemic that's sweeping the world. So you've mentioned Science of Character, and you've also mentioned Adaptable Mind, which you're re-releasing. And there's one other video I've actually watched as well, and that's 30,000 Days. And I tend to ask the question now, when I'm if I get the opportunity, I say, can anybody tell me the significance of 30,000 days? So I'll let you share that if you like.
Well, again, it was me finding this fact that if you live the average life expectancy, that's about 30,000 days. Mm-hmm. And I just loved thinking about that. Wow, 30,000 days. And I'm turning 50 next week, so I'm more than halfway done. And that really makes you think of life differently. So that's another 10-minute film we made. And I just thought of another one that I think you would really enjoy. Have you seen A Declaration of Interdependence?
No, I'm not seeing that one.
We just re-released it last film, and we rewrote the Declaration of Independence, and we wrote it as a Declaration of Independence, and it's very powerful to rewatch. And I'm actually, any of your listeners, I'm doing a call for entries right now for a new movie. A lot of my movies that you're mentioning, I invite people around the world to send me videos of themselves answering some question that I'm asking or I'm wrestling with. So if anyone that's listening is interested, I call them cloud films. I don't like the term crowdsource. I like cloud source because it sounds more poetic. But I have an email list I've had for over 25 years, and I invite people to make a movie with me. We're doing that right now. And they can just find out about it from my film studio website, which is letitripple.org, which is the nonprofit I run in San Francisco. But yeah, we have made quite a lot of films about kind of all the subjects that we're touching upon. In 30,000 Days, I do think a lot about death. I think having my father die when I was so young, and I just think it makes you just realize how you don't know how many days you're here, and how are you going to live? How are you going to lead? How are you going to model behavior? And I think even, parenting is so much about modeling behavior. And I think leadership is a really interesting thing to think about. And
it's interesting you say that. Actually, when I talk about leadership, I tend to put it in a domestic role. So I talk about leadership as with parents, because most people can then relate to it. Because leadership's a concept most people think, well, that's a business thing, but actually, leadership is nothing about business. It's about how we act, how we want to lead people. Ultimately, it's leadership. So it's leading people in a direction. And I guess one of the things that you created is a following. You've mentioned about the Character Day. Do you want to explain what Character Day is?
And I'm so glad you talked about leadership in terms of the home, because a lot of times when I talk about just that we unplug one day a week, a lot of people complain their kids are on the screens too much, whatever, but they're just looking at you, and you're on the screens too much, and you're the parent. So parenting is so much modeling behavior. So I'm a big advocate. If you want your kids to do something, you got to do it too. And so make it a family thing. But Character Day, we started doing that after we made Science of Character, because we wanted to have a big global conversation about the science of character. So it grew to over 200,000 events all over the world, happen all on the same day. And they show our films. We have printed discussion materials, online discussion materials, and then we bring together leaders from all over the world to talk about the subject. So it's been very exciting. It grew so big that it was actually kind of taking over all of our time. Like the first year we had maybe 1,500 events. And then when it went to 200,000, it was like, we couldn't make films anymore. Well, no, it was talk about leadership. It was one of those moments where, I also founded something called the Webby Awards in my 20s, which is the Oscars of the internet. And it grew and grew and grew. And then suddenly I wanted to do something new, and I eventually sold it. And it still happens every year. Actually, a lot of English, we give a lot of British winners. But I found in my career, I love creating something, and then I build it and it grows, and wonderful, it grows and it becomes so big, but then it doesn't allow me to do anything new. So we might this year, after doing Character Day for 6 years now, we might just let people do it on their own. So it won't be as much heavy lifting from us on our end, and just so we can make more movies, because we have a new film series we're really excited about working on. And it's interesting, to also understand. I think when I was younger, I thought you never stop doing something, never stop. But then I think as a leader, you understand, well, you have to know when it's time to try something new also. And when your work in that space, like I love that you've seen all my films. I have so many today on Twitter, like people were tweeting a film I made 8 years ago, and my films continue to do their work in the world. They don't require my energy anymore.
Yeah.
And they can continue to play, and then I get to go on and make a new film or write a new book or something. So that's been, something. As I'm turning 50, I'm thinking about how do you create space and know when to give yourself space to start something new.
Yeah, but I'd say that all of your films I've seen, and I haven't seen obviously all of them, they are very thought-provoking. They're obviously there's a message, and that makes people think, and actually, how does that relate to how I am? And I've written down the question that comes up at the end of Science of Character, and that is, who do you want to be? And isn't that such an important thing? And whether you're leading or not, what you aspire to be is so important as far as the way you live your life.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot as we've been in lockdown, because I think so many people are defined by their careers and getting dressed and going to an office, and suddenly you're just at home. And it's like, who are you? And a lot of us, I'm sure you're quite busy with your podcast, and I've been doing a lot of talks on Zoom and various things, but ultimately we're stripped of a lot of our normal dressings of what we do. And it really comes down more to, how do you want to be? How do you want to be in your home? What's your voice in the world? And I think that's a really good question to continue to ask all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And it links in with so many other things, isn't it? It's how you actually want to be seen, how you want to lead your life. And you've already mentioned about that end of life stuff. We need to think about the legacy we leave. Sounds a bit morbid, but actually, what else is there to work towards? If you can't think about what you leave behind, then, it's certainly something that drives me forward, and my legacy is really important to me. I guess that's the same for you.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah. Thinking about, what do you want to be remembered for? And yeah, I've been thinking about all the, just turning 50. Like I was supposed to have this big, we're all going to travel somewhere, and that's been not happening.
No.
And then I'm like, what do I really want? I really want to see all the people I love on a Zoom call right now. And, my husband was like, they'll do a toast for you. And, when people give you a toast on your birthday, what do they say? What means something to them about you? And how are you contributing to your family, to your community, in the world? And I love being able to channel my creativity to these films that really reach far and wide. And then even during the lockdown, I've been doing a baking class on Fridays, which is so simple, but it's been so much fun. Every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Let's see, what time would it be in England? You'd be making late night bread.
Yes.
But it's been so much fun. And I think as much as I'm out there in the world, I love being at home, and I love to cook and bake. And I've been really thinking, I know this is going to sound so unusual coming from a woman CEO, but I've been really enjoying housework too, which I'm like, what is it? I feel like I'm tending to my home in this whole new way this last 3 weeks that I've never had before.
Yeah.
I'm normally, we're a dual parent working, juggling everything, but
you know what I was going to say? I was saying something the other day about expectations, and our expectations are now so much lower because we can't do certain things. We have to make the most of what we have here at home. So how do? We can either just mope around, or we can say, right, how can we be creative and make this actually something that we're going to remember? And there's a lovely video going around at the moment about someone that says, I hope after this, this is what we'll remember, and it would be time that we spent with our loved ones. Exactly what you just said.
Oh, would you send that to me? Because the 3 questions we're asking people for this new film we're making, which any of your listeners can send me if they send it to me quickly, and I thought maybe you can do it. Actually, I would love it if you did it. Okay, here's the question. One is, what are you scared about? Because let's acknowledge there is fear. The second one is, what's the best thing that can come from this? And I think that speaks to what you were just saying. What's the best that can come from humanity from this experience? And then the third one are, what are beautiful acts of kindness that you've seen? And and then we're asking everyone to make this symbol, which in sign language means connected, which is two fingers together.
Oh yeah, I saw you do it. What is it?
Yeah, like
Like this,
that.
like this. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So if
yeah.
you did that, Mark, I would love it. And
Okay.
but I think this sense of what are the questions we're asking right now? Yeah, how are we going to remember? This could be like, it's an opportunity. And I think everyone could be like, oh my gosh, I can't leave the house. I feel like, what an opportunity. We can't leave our house. Like, I think creatively, like I love creative constraints too. But we're living in a creative constraint. And how do you make, that's like why I like short films. That's a creative constraint. You can only have 8 minutes to tell the whole history of the science of character. And of course, there's so many scary things happening, but you are home. You might be living alone. You might be with someone you love, with kids. And this is this incredible opportunity if you choose it to be, and for lessons to be learned, to appreciate where you are, to make the most of where you are. And that's great if you look at it that way. That's about character. Rise to the occasion. It's like how you respond to a situation is ultimately what defines you.
Yeah. And that leads me nicely onto those key characters traits that allow us to do that. And you do highlight them in Science of Character, the 7 traits which will lead to us having a meaningful, happy life. Can you remember all 7 of them?
Yeah. Well, it's based on that. Paul Tough wrote this book that there's 7 character strengths that can kind of, if you can work on those, or if you have those, you can get out of almost any situation, like poverty or so. Gratitude. And I'm a big believer, I write in a gratitude journal in the morning and the evening, and it frames my day. It helps me so much. And I only really started doing that like, I don't know, 7 years ago, but it's just huge. Empathy, grit or perseverance, curiosity. Let's see, this 4. Do you have them listed out? What's the other 3?
Self-control.
Self-control. Oh yeah, that's a really interesting one. Self-control. As the homeschooling, I've been thinking about that a lot because can you have the discipline to stick to a schedule? I mean, when there's no other people around, that's a lot. Self-control. What other one?
We've run out now, haven't we? You said gratitude.
I said gratitude, grit, self-control,
curiosity. We should have got better prepared. But if you want to know,
a long time ago.
So anybody listen to this, do you want to know what the actual 7 are, then letitripple.org is where you'll find them, and the Science of Character video.
It's interesting because there was some pushback onto that. There's just 7. I mean, first of all, I was so excited to learn that there was 24 character strengths by Seligman and Peterson, which led to the positive psychology movement. Yeah. But then there's other positive psychologists that said that's too many. It's too many to remember, although I liked seeing that many. And then, there's different schools of thought around character, but I like thinking of them as all levers that you have to work with. It's like your keyboard of your life that you can focus on. Gratitude, you'll feel more grateful. Focus on empathy, you're going to feel more empathy. If you want to change a behavior, practice more self-control, and it's like a muscle memory. So I like thinking of it as all of these different things that I can work on. And we're all works in progress. That's another element to, I think, the science of character and all of this is that if you look at life as we're living a work in progress every day. You're never done. You're never finished. You can always be working on yourself. And then there's this other quote that's from another movie I made. I'm Jewish, and I made a Jewish version of the science of character called The Making of a Mensch, which has to do with a lot of Jewish ideas around it. And there's this quote by Israel Salanter, which is, "At first I tried to change the world and I failed. Then I tried to change my community and I failed. And then I tried to change my family and then I failed. And then I changed myself and I was able to change the world." And I love that idea that thinking about your character is not for self-indulgence or self-help or any of that. It's really so you can contribute best to your family, community, and world. So the more you understand your strengths and weaknesses and what you want to work on and what are the things that can make you behave better in the world, it's going to just be helpful to every aspect of your life, and you'll be able to contribute better as a leader or just as a person.
And that's a great lesson for leadership in that, don't try and change others, change yourself and be the best person you can be, and ultimately that will lead for people to follow you. And that's as simple as it gets, really. Sadly, Tiffany, we've got to wrap things up in a few minutes because I know you've got to leave. So I always ask my guests some top tips to leave our audience with. We've covered quite a lot of stuff in that 25 minutes or so we've been talking. Is there anything you want to wrap things up with, I suppose?
Here's my thing as I'm turning 50 in a week. And I think the single greatest lesson I've learned in my life, and the reason why I ended up writing a book about it, is because it's free, simple, and ancient wisdom, is this idea of a day of rest, which we no longer have in our society, but the actual, and I don't come at it from a religious perspective because I am not religious, I'm more of a cultural Jew, but the more I've learned about the concept of the Sabbath or a day of rest or Shabbat or whatever you want to call about it, every different culture has a different name for it. There's so much wisdom in having you're off at work where you reflect, where you think about what you already have, what you want to work on, all these things we talked about. I feel like a full day off of screens each week is when I do all of that. My best work on that subject is when I really think and reflect, and I'm not so reactive, but I'm more internal. And I think we need to create space for that. So that's why I wrote the book 24/6, which it's available in England. There's an audio version that I read it, but I have all of my thoughts about that subject in there. But I think the biggest tip is to take breaks away from the screen and give yourself time to think and reflect and to write and just be. There's a lot of value in giving your mind that kind of space. I don't think we do any of it anymore.
I think in this instance, I think one tip is more than enough. And I think it's a really, really important message. And hopefully in the coming weeks, we will all learn that we need to switch off. And that's when we do our best work. And probably that's what the world needs more of. Tiffany, thank you ever so much for your time. I've really enjoyed it. And hopefully we will connect again at some point in the future.
Oh, it was such a pleasure to see you we're doing this over a video Zoom, which is so nice. And I hope I meet you in person someday.
Great stuff. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.